Now that we have the gun set up properly, let's go over some motion technique. First, watch me spray this panel for a bit. You can see that I am super consistent with my movements. This is the most important thing about spraying. The distance of the sprayer to the surface, the speed at which I move my hand, the angle at which I point the sprayer, the amount of overlap between each pass, all of this has to be consistent to get a nice finish. Consistency is the key. As you continue to watch me spray, let's break it down a bit. First, notice the consistency of my speed. Moving your hand back and forth in a constant, steady manner isn't something most people do in day-to-day life, so beginners will often accelerate and decelerate their movements without realizing, often slowing down toward the middle of the pass and speeding up at the end. While you're practicing, focus hard on how fast your hand is moving and try and keep it that way all the time. Second, notice the rate of speed. About 1 foot per second is a good rule of thumb. You may notice as we go through these clips that in some I am moving faster than others. This is because different products flow differently and I adjust my speed to compensate. We will go over that in the next video. The rate of speed is important because if you go too slow, the product will be laid down too thick, and on a vertical surface this will cause a sag or a run, which is time consuming to repair. If you move too fast, you will end up with a dusty, textured finish. Go over coat thickness in more detail later. Also, the way you set up your gun in the beginning can affect how fast you need to move. More paint flow will require faster movement to avoid runs and sags. Third, note the distance between the gun and the surface. About 7 inches is a good rule of thumb, although this can change slightly from 6 to 8 inches. If you are using a wider spray pattern, you may want to move further away, and a smaller spray pattern would require you to move slightly closer, although this is only by an inch or so. If you go too close, the thickness of the paint will be inconsistent, and it will be really easy to cause a run, and if you go too far, the atomized paint can actually dry in midair before it reaches the surface, which ruins the finish. Fourthly, make sure your lines are straight. This sounds like an easy, obvious one, but I find that when I teach new people, I tell them to focus on their speed, and in concentrating so much on that, their hand starts drifting and moving from side to side, resulting in a wobbly line and areas that didn't get overlapped enough and therefore aren't adequately covered. Fifthly, watch the angle of your gun. If you tip the gun from side to side, the paint will be laid down unevenly. You can imagine that the paint comes out in the shape of a triangle, and if you tilt that triangle, one side will be closer to the tip of the gun and therefore thicker than the other side. An up and down motion is less important since the pattern is flat from that perspective. Sometimes you even want to be tilting the gun up and down slightly if the surface you are spraying has different angles to it, as seen in this clip. Sixthly, you want constant overlap. With each pass, you should be overlapping the previous pass by at least 50%. So if your pattern width is 7 inches, you should be moving over about 3.5 inches each time. Another thing to watch out for is to make sure you spray off the edge of the piece with your first and last pass. Often beginners will stop a couple inches before the edge, and therefore the very edge won't be thick enough. If you aim your final pass right at the edge, allowing half the spray pattern to shoot into the air, it will ensure even coverage across the entire piece, as seen here. Seventhly, know when to press and release the trigger. You should never be stationary when the trigger is pressed, always moving, or you will cause a drip. This means that you should start spraying an inch or two before the surface and release an inch or two after the surface. Also, don't just hold the trigger down and move back and forth. If you change direction while over a surface, you will get a thick spot, resulting in a run, and if you change direction past the surface in midair, you will just waste product and create more dust. Getting into a rhythm of press, release, as you go back and forth over your piece can also help with your speed consistency. Eighthly and finally, you want a constant thickness. Part of the way in which the paint forms a perfectly smooth finish is that the individual droplets coming out of the gun flow together on the surface, creating a smooth result. You need enough paint laid down, however, to achieve this. If you spray the paint too thin, by moving too fast, or not having the gun set to enough flow, for example, instead of a nice smooth surface, you will end up with individual droplets that have dried without flowing together. This will result in a bumpy, textured surface. In this clip, you can see that the surface looks slightly wavy. This is normal and is okay. The paint will level out on its own. If it looks shiny and reflective while it's wet, almost like a mirror, you know you've done a good job. Any inconsistencies would be visible from this angle in the form of different sheens and patterns in the surface. This drawer, though, as you can see, has been sprayed perfectly. Most of what it takes to become a good sprayer is just repetition, keeping in mind that consistency is the key. Focus on all 8 points I told you today and get lots of practice in, and you'll be spraying a perfect finish in no time.